Lonely Cowboy rescued a freezing widow and her twin boys during a deadly snowstorm, but he had no idea powerful men were hunting them for a secret worth millions. What happened next changed his life forever. The cowboy's promise. The winter wind howled across the empty plains of Montana like a wounded animal. Snow drifted across the frozen road, covering wagon tracks and fences alike. Most folks had already locked themselves indoors for the night, praying the storm would pass before morning. But Caleb Turner wasn't most folks. The rugged cowboy pulled his coat tighter as he guided his horse through the blizzard. His face was rough from years under the sun, his beard dusted with snowflakes. At 38 years old, Caleb had spent most of his life alone on his ranch outside the small town of Briar Ridge. And that was exactly how he preferred it. No family, no wife, no distractions, just cattle, horses, and silence. As lightning flashed behind the dark clouds, Caleb spotted something near the roadside. At first, he thought it was abandoned luggage. Then the shape moved. He quickly dismounted and rushed closer. A woman. She sat curled beside a broken wagon wheel, shivering violently beneath a thin blanket. Two small boys clung tightly to her dress while snow piled around them. The woman looked up weakly, her pale lips trembling. "Please," she whispered. "My children." Caleb frowned. He wasn't looking for trouble. But one glance at the boys changed something inside him. They couldn't have been older than 4. Twins. Their cheeks were red from the cold, and one of them was barely conscious. "Damn it," Caleb muttered. Without another word, he removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around the children. The woman tried to stand but nearly collapsed. "I've got you," he said gruffly. Carefully, Caleb lifted the weakest child into his arms while helping the woman onto his horse. "Your name?" he asked. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Whitmore." "And the boys?" "Henry and Hudson." Caleb nodded once. "Hold on tight." The journey back to the ranch took nearly an hour through brutal wind and ice. By the time they arrived, Emma's hands were blue from the cold. Caleb carried the boys inside first and placed them near the fireplace. Then he helped Emma into a chair before throwing more wood into the flames. The cabin slowly warmed. Emma looked around nervously. "You don't have to help us anymore," she said softly. "We'll leave tomorrow morning." Caleb poured hot coffee into a cup without looking at her. "You'll freeze before sunrise." Silence filled the cabin. The twins stared at Caleb with wide eyes. Finally, the smaller boy pointed toward him. "Mama," he whispered, "is he a cowboy?" Caleb almost smiled. "Used to be," he replied. Emma watched him carefully. There was something strange about this man. He looked hard and distant, but his actions told another story entirely. "Thank you," she said quietly. Caleb simply nodded. Hours later, after the boys had fallen asleep beneath warm blankets, Emma stood near the fireplace. "I should explain," she said. "You don't owe me anything." "I do." Caleb leaned against the wall silently. Emma took a deep breath. "My husband died last spring." Caleb's expression softened slightly. "He worked at a lumber mill in Wyoming," she continued. "After he passed, the bank took everything. We traveled west because someone promised me work in Briar Ridge. And," Emma looked down, "there was no job." The room fell silent again. Caleb understood that kind of disappointment. People lied every day when survival depended on it. "You can stay here until the storm passes," he finally said. Emma blinked in surprise. "That's too generous." "It ain't generosity," Caleb replied. "Just common sense." For the first time that night, Emma smiled faintly. The next morning, Caleb woke before sunrise as usual. He stepped outside to feed the horses when he noticed smoke rising from the chimney. Emma was already awake. Inside, she stood near the stove cooking eggs while the twins giggled nearby. "You didn't have to do that," Caleb said. "You gave us shelter," she replied. "Least I can do is make breakfast." The cabin smelled warmer than it had in years. Strangely, it felt alive. Caleb sat quietly at the table while the boys talked endlessly. "Do you own all these horses?" Henry asked excitedly. "Yep. Can we see them?" "After breakfast." Hudson grinned. Emma looked embarrassed. "Sorry. They ask too many questions. Caleb shrugged. Ain't a bad thing. Over the next few days, the storm trapped them at the ranch. Roads disappeared beneath thick snow, leaving no safe path to town. At first, Caleb kept his distance. But the boys slowly broke through his walls. They followed him everywhere, into the barn, to the chicken coop, even while repairing fences. "Mr. Caleb," Hudson asked one afternoon, "why do you live alone?" Emma froze after hearing the question. But Caleb surprised her with his answer. "Sometimes people get used to being lonely." The little boy tilted his head innocently. "Doesn't that make you sad?" Caleb didn't answer, because the truth was, it did. That evening, Emma noticed Caleb sitting alone on the porch, staring into the snowy fields. "You okay?" she asked gently. "Been a long time since this place sounded like laughter." Emma sat beside him carefully. "You've helped us more than you know." Caleb looked ahead quietly. "My wife used to love winter." Emma turned toward him slowly. "You were married. Long time ago. What happened?" Caleb swallowed hard. "She died having our baby." Emma's heart broke instantly. "And the child?" "They both died." The wind whistled softly between them. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. Caleb nodded once. "After that, I stopped needing people." But even as he said the words, he glanced through the window at the twins laughing near the fireplace. And for the first time in years, the ranch no longer felt empty. Yet neither of them realized danger was already riding toward Briar Ridge. Because across town, a wealthy landowner named Victor Hale had just learned something unexpected. Emma Whitmore was alive, and she carried something he desperately wanted. The secret Emma was hiding. The snowstorm finally ended 3 days later, leaving the world outside Caleb Turner's ranch buried beneath thick white silence. Morning sunlight spilled across the frozen fields while Caleb saddled his horse near the barn. Inside the cabin, Emma folded blankets while the twins chased each other around the fireplace. For the first time in months, she felt safe. But safety was dangerous when you were running from the past. Emma glanced nervously through the frosted window. Every passing sound made her heart race. Caleb noticed. "You expecting someone?" he asked quietly. Emma forced a weak smile. "No." But Caleb had spent his entire life reading people. And he knew she was lying. Later that afternoon, the twins played outside with the ranch dogs while Emma helped Caleb repair a broken fence. "You don't belong out here," Caleb said suddenly. Emma looked confused. "What do you mean? You talk like city folk." A faint smile crossed her lips. "I grew up in Boston." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Boston? That's a long way from Montana." "It feels even farther now." The cowboy studied her carefully. Emma's hands were rough from hard work now, but he could tell she once lived differently. Her manners, her speech, even the way she carried herself, it all pointed to another life. "So what happened?" he asked. Emma stopped hammering the fence. For a moment, she considered telling him the truth. But fear won again. "Life happened," she answered softly. Caleb didn't push further. That evening, after dinner, the twins fell asleep quickly beside the fireplace. Emma sat quietly sewing a torn shirt while Caleb cleaned his rifle nearby. The cabin felt peaceful, until heavy knocking suddenly echoed through the door. Bang, bang, bang. Emma froze instantly. Caleb stood slowly. The knocking came again. "Open up," a deep voice shouted. Caleb moved toward the door cautiously while Emma's face turned pale. "Do you know them?" he asked quietly. Her silence answered everything. Caleb opened the door halfway. 2 men stood outside wearing expensive coats dusted with snow. Behind them waited black horses in a wagon. The taller man removed his gloves calmly. "Evening," he said. "We're looking for a woman named Emma Whitmore." Caleb's expression hardened. "Why? That's private business." From inside the cabin, Emma quietly grabbed the twins and stepped backward. The stranger noticed movement behind Caleb. "There she is." Emma's breathing quickened. "Please," she whispered. "Don't let them take my children." Something dangerous flashed across Caleb's eyes. "She ain't going anywhere tonight," he said coldly. The tall man sighed impatiently. "Sir, you don't understand." Mrs. Whitmore owes a significant debt to Mr. Victor Hale. Emma shook her head desperately. That's a lie. The second man stepped forward. Victor Hale legally owns the property left by your late husband, including the mining contract. Caleb frowned. Mining contract? Emma looked terrified. The tall man smiled slightly. Seems she hasn't told you everything. Caleb glanced back at Emma. She looked seconds away from collapsing. Talk tomorrow, Caleb said firmly. Now leave. The stranger's face darkened. Mr. Hale doesn't like delays, and I don't like trespassers. For several tense seconds, nobody moved. Then Caleb slowly lifted his rifle. That ended the conversation. The men climbed back onto their horses. But before leaving, the tall stranger pointed toward Emma. You can run all you want, he warned. Victor Hale always gets what belongs to him. The wagon disappeared into the snowy darkness. Inside the cabin, silence filled the air. Emma's hands trembled violently. Caleb shut the door and locked it. Start talking. Tears filled Emma's eyes. I tried to protect them, she whispered. Protect them from what? Emma sat down slowly. My husband wasn't just a lumber worker. Caleb listened carefully. He discovered gold. The cowboy's eyes narrowed. Where? In the mountains north of Briar Ridge. Emma continued shakily. Victor Hale owned the land nearby. When my husband found gold, Hale demanded ownership. But my husband refused. And then, 3 weeks later, my husband died in a mining accident. Caleb's jaw tightened. You think Hale killed him? Emma looked down silently. That silence said enough. My husband hid the official mining documents before he died, she whispered. Documents proving the land legally belonged to us. Caleb finally understood. That's why they're hunting you. Emma nodded. They want the papers. Where are they? Emma hesitated, then slowly reached beneath her dress collar and removed a tiny silver key hanging from a chain. My husband told me if anything happened to him, take this key to Briar Ridge. Caleb stared at it. What does it open? I don't know. Before Caleb could respond, little Henry suddenly appeared half asleep beside the hallway. Mama. Emma quickly wiped her tears. It's okay, sweetheart. The little boy hugged her tightly. Caleb watched quietly from across the room. For years, he had avoided other people's problems. But now danger had entered his home. And strangely, he didn't want Emma and the boys to leave. The next morning, Caleb rode into town for supplies while Emma stayed behind with the twins. But Briar Ridge was buzzing with rumors. Victor Hale's men had already spread stories about Emma being a thief and fraud. Inside the general store, conversation stopped the moment Caleb entered. Old rancher Walter Briggs approached carefully. You sheltering that widow? Caleb didn't answer. Walter sighed. Victor Hale's dangerous, son. I ain't scared of him. You should be. Caleb grabbed supplies calmly. Hale practically owns this town now. Sheriff works for him too. That didn't surprise Caleb. Money controlled everything in Briar Ridge. As Caleb exited the store, he noticed Victor Hale himself standing across the street beside a black carriage. Tall, well-dressed, cold-eyed, Victor smiled faintly. Mr. Turner, he called. Caleb stopped. I hear you've taken in Mrs. Whitmore. Ain't your business. Victor stepped closer. She's lying to you. Caleb remained silent. Victor lowered his voice. That woman is carrying documents worth thousands of dollars. People have died over less. Then maybe you should stop chasing her. Victor chuckled softly. You think you're protecting her. But eventually, everyone learns the same lesson. What lesson? Victor's smile disappeared. Mercy is expensive. Caleb stared at him coldly, then mounted his horse without another word. But as he rode back toward the ranch, a terrible feeling settled deep in his chest. Because men like Victor Hale never gave up easily. And somewhere far behind Caleb, 3 armed riders had already begun following him through the snow. The night riders. The icy wind whipped across the plains as Caleb Turner urged his horse faster through the snow-covered trail leading back to his ranch. Something felt wrong. Years of surviving harsh winters and dangerous men had sharpened his instincts like a blade. And right now, every instinct screamed the same warning. You're being followed. Caleb casually glanced behind him. 3 riders. Far enough to avoid suspicion. Close enough to keep pace. Victor Hale's men. Caleb's jaw tightened. He pressed his boots into the stirrups and guided the horse off the main trail toward a narrow wooded path only locals knew existed. The riders followed. That confirmed it. Caleb reached beneath his coat and loosened the revolver hanging at his side. Snow cracked beneath pounding hooves as the chase intensified through the trees. Then, bang, a gunshot exploded behind him. The bullet struck a tree inches from Caleb's shoulder. So that's how it is, he muttered. Another shot rang out. Caleb quickly ducked low across the saddle before steering sharply downhill toward frozen riverbanks. The riders cursed behind him. The trail became dangerous, packed with ice and hidden rocks beneath the snow. Perfect. Caleb knew this land better than anyone. Suddenly, he pulled hard on the reins near a steep ridge and disappeared between narrow cliffs. The riders followed without thinking. Big mistake. The lead horse slipped violently on the icy ground. Its rider crashed sideways into deep snow with a scream while the other 2 horses panicked. Caleb used the moment instantly. He spun his horse around and pointed his revolver directly at them. That's far enough. The remaining riders froze. One slowly reached for his weapon. Caleb fired first. Bang! The bullet struck the man's hat clean off his head. Next one won't miss, Caleb warned coldly. Fear spread across their faces. They grabbed their injured partner and retreated into the storm without another word. Caleb watched them disappear, but he knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Back at the ranch, Emma paced nervously near the window while the twins sat quietly by the fireplace. "Mama," Hudson whispered, as Caleb coming back. Before Emma could answer, hoofbeats echoed outside. Relief flooded her face. Caleb entered moments later carrying supplies dusted with snow. But Emma immediately noticed the tension in his eyes. "What happened?" "Victor Hale sent men after me." Emma's face turned pale. "I'm so sorry." Caleb removed his gloves slowly. "Sorry ain't gonna stop what's coming." The twins looked frightened now. Henry walked closer carefully. "Are bad men coming here?" Caleb looked at the little boy. For a moment, memories flashed painfully through his mind. The child he never got to meet. The family he lost. Then he knelt beside Henry. "Not while I'm here." The boy nodded, believing him completely. And strangely, that trust terrified Caleb more than the gunfight had. Because now he had something to lose again. That night, after the twins fell asleep upstairs, Emma finally gathered the courage to speak openly. "There's more," she admitted quietly. Caleb sat across from her near the fire. "I figured." Emma pulled an old folded paper from inside her bag. "My husband left this before he died." Caleb unfolded it carefully. It was half of a map. Strange markings crossed the mountains north of Briar Ridge. Near the center, one symbol was circled in red ink. "What is it?" Caleb asked. Emma shook her head. "I don't know, but my husband said the key and map together would expose Victor Hale." Caleb frowned. "So where's the other half?" Emma hesitated. "Victor Hale has it." The cowboy leaned back heavily. "Well, that complicates things." Emma stared into the fire. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted my boys safe." Caleb studied her silently, then finally asked the question he'd avoided for days. "Why trust me?" Emma looked up slowly. "Because when you found us, you could have walked away." The fire crackled softly between them. "But you didn't." For the first time in years, Caleb didn't know how to respond. The next morning, the ranch felt almost peaceful again. The twins helped feed chickens while Emma washed clothes outside. For a few precious hours, life seemed normal. Until a rider suddenly appeared near the gate. Sheriff Dalton. Caleb's expression darkened immediately. The sheriff dismounted slowly, adjusting his heavy coat. "Morning, Caleb. What do you want?" Dalton glanced toward Emma. "Need a word." Caleb stepped forward protectively. "You can say it here." The sheriff sighed. "Victor Hale filed charges against Emma Whitmore." Emma froze. "What charges?" "Property theft, fraud, and evading lawful debt collection." "That's nonsense," Caleb snapped. Dalton lowered his voice. "Look, between us, I know Hale's dirty, but he owns half this town. And the other half owns you. The sheriff ignored the insult. He wants the widow brought in by tomorrow. Emma clutched the boys tightly. If I refuse, Dalton looked genuinely troubled. Then Hale sends bounty hunters instead. Caleb's eyes hardened instantly. Let him come. Sheriff Dalton stepped closer. You don't understand how powerful this man is. No, Caleb replied coldly. You don't understand how stubborn I am. The sheriff stared at him for several seconds. Then quietly handed Caleb a folded paper. What's this? A warning. Caleb opened it. His blood ran cold. It was an old newspaper clipping. Headline: Local miner dies in explosion. Underneath was a blurry photograph of Emma's husband standing beside another man. Caleb's eyes narrowed. The other man was Victor Hale. He was your husband's partner? Caleb asked. Emma looked shocked. No, my husband hated him. Sheriff Dalton nodded grimly. That's not all. He pointed toward the article's date. 3 days before the explosion. Caleb looked up slowly. You think Hale planned it? Dalton's silence was answer. Enough. Then the sheriff said something that changed everything. There's an abandoned mining camp in Blackstone Canyon, he whispered. Folks say Hale's been searching it for months. Emma suddenly gasped. The key. Caleb looked at her. My husband mentioned Blackstone once. Sheriff Dalton stepped back toward his horse. If you're smart, he warned quietly, you'll leave Montana tonight. But Caleb already knew he wouldn't. Because this fight was no longer about gold or maps. It was about protecting the only people who had made his broken ranch feel like a home again. And Caleb Turner would burn the entire valley down before letting Victor Hale take that away. Far across town, inside his luxurious office, Victor Hale stood beside a window watching snow fall over Briar Ridge. One of his men entered nervously. Sir, Caleb Turner fought them off. Victor remained calm, and the widow, still at the ranch. Victor slowly poured himself a drink. Then smiled darkly. Prepare the men. The nervous worker swallowed hard. How many? Victor looked out into the storm. All of them. The fire at Blackstone Canyon. The wind roared outside Caleb Turner's ranch as darkness swallowed the Montana plains. Inside the cabin, tension filled every corner. Emma sat quietly near the fireplace while the twins slept upstairs beneath thick blankets. Caleb stood near the window, rifle in hand, watching the snow-covered fields carefully. Sheriff Dalton's warning echoed in his mind. Prepare the men. Victor Hale was coming, and Caleb knew men like Hale didn't send threats twice. You should leave, Emma whispered suddenly. Caleb didn't turn around. No, Caleb, you think running will save you? Emma lowered her eyes. It's better than getting you killed. That finally made Caleb face her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb walked closer slowly. I spent 5 years after my wife died pretending nothing mattered anymore, he said quietly. Then you and those boys walked into my house. Emma's eyes filled with tears. You gave this place life again. The fire crackled softly between them. And I ain't letting Hale destroy that. Before Emma could answer, bang, a gunshot shattered the front window. Glass exploded across the cabin. Down, Caleb shouted. Emma ducked instantly as another bullet slammed into the wooden wall. Outside, horses thundered through the snow. Victor Hale's men had arrived. Caleb grabbed his rifle and rushed toward the door. Stay upstairs with the boys. Emma grabbed his arm desperately. There's too many. Caleb checked the rifle chamber calmly. Then they brought too few bullets. Outside, 6 armed riders surrounded the ranch house while lanterns flickered in the storm. One rider shouted loudly, Victor Hale wants the widow. Caleb stepped onto the porch with his rifle raised. She ain't yours to take. The men spread out across the yard. Their leader smirked. You really wanna die over this? Caleb cocked the rifle. Try me. The gunfight exploded instantly. Bang. Caleb fired first, knocking one rider clean off his horse. The others returned fire wildly. Bullets ripped through wooden fences while horses screamed in panic. Emma held the twins tightly upstairs as gunshots echoed below. Hudson buried his face against her shoulder. Mama, I'm scared. Emma kissed his forehead. It's okay, baby. But deep down, she was terrified too. Outside, Caleb moved with deadly precision through the chaos. Years of surviving alone had turned him into something dangerous. A survivor. Another rider charged toward the barn. Caleb fired again. Bang! The man crashed into the snow. But more riders kept coming. Suddenly, whoosh! Flames erupted near the stable. Emma gasped from upstairs. They set the barn on fire. Orange flames climbed rapidly into the stormy sky as smoke spread across the ranch. Caleb's face darkened with fury. That barn held everything he'd built for years. And Victor Hale was burning it to the ground. One rider laughed cruelly. "Come out now, cowboy." Caleb disappeared behind a water trough before firing again. The laughter stopped instantly. But then another terrible sound came. A child screaming. "Henry!" Emma spun around upstairs in horror. The bedroom window was open. Snow blew violently inside. Henry was gone. No. Emma rushed downstairs in panic. Caleb grabbed her immediately. "What happened?" "Henry's missing." Caleb's blood froze. Outside the ranch gate, one of Hale's riders galloped away carrying a small struggling child beneath his arm. "No!" Emma screamed. Without hesitation, Caleb mounted his horse and charged into the storm. The chase tore across frozen fields beneath falling snow. Henry cried desperately while the rider pushed his horse harder. "Help me!" Caleb's rage burned hotter than the fire behind him. He leaned low over the saddle and gained ground quickly. The rider looked back nervously. Too late. Caleb tackled him violently off the horse. Both men crashed into deep snow. The outlaw reached for a knife. Crack! Caleb punched him hard across the jaw. Years of pain, grief, and loneliness exploded through every strike. "You touch that boy again," Caleb growled, "and I'll bury you myself." The terrified outlaw stumbled backward and fled into darkness. Henry ran crying into Caleb's arms. "You came back." Caleb held the shaking child tightly. Always. Back at the ranch, the fire had spread dangerously across the stable. Emma stood outside holding Hudson while neighbors from nearby farms finally arrived to help. Buckets of water flew through the freezing air. Sheriff Dalton rode in moments later. "Where's Hale's men?" "Gone," Caleb answered coldly. The sheriff looked around at the burning ranch. "This is turning into war." Caleb dismounted slowly while Henry clung tightly to him. "No," Caleb replied. "War already started." Hours later, the flames were finally controlled. But half the stable was destroyed. Emma stood beside Caleb watching smoke rise into the cold night sky. "I ruined your life," she whispered. Caleb looked at her quietly. Then shook his head. "No." He stared toward the dark mountains in the distance. "Hale did." Emma followed his gaze. "Blackstone Canyon." Caleb nodded. "That's where this ends." The next morning before sunrise, Caleb prepared supplies, horses, weapons, and warm blankets. Emma watched nervously. "You really believe the truth is hidden there?" Caleb loaded ammunition calmly. "I believe Hale's scared of something." Sheriff Dalton arrived shortly after dawn carrying an old map. "I shouldn't be helping you," he muttered. "But you are," Caleb said. Dalton handed him the map. "There's an abandoned mine deep inside Blackstone Canyon. Folks say nobody's gone near it since the explosion that killed Emma's husband." Emma looked down sadly. Dalton lowered his voice. "And there's something else." Caleb looked up. "Hale left town an hour ago." Emma's heart sank. "He's heading there too." Caleb mounted his horse slowly. "Then we better move faster." Snow began falling once again as the group prepared for the dangerous journey north. Ahead of them waited Blackstone Canyon, hidden secrets, and a truth powerful enough to destroy Victor Hale forever. But none of them knew that deep inside the abandoned mine, someone else was already waiting. The Mine of Shadows. The journey to Blackstone Canyon took nearly 2 days through brutal snow and dangerous mountain trails. Caleb Turner rode ahead silently while Emma followed beside Sheriff Dalton in the supply wagon. The twins slept beneath heavy blankets in the back, exhausted from the cold. Dark mountains towered over them like giants. The deeper they traveled into the canyon, the quieter the world became. No birds, no animals, nothing, only wind. Emma pulled her coat tighter. This place feels cursed. Sheriff Dalton nodded grimly. Most folks around Briar Ridge believe it is. Caleb studied the cliffs carefully. Years ago, Blackstone Canyon had been full of miners chasing dreams of gold and fortune. Then came the explosion. After that, people stopped coming back. As evening approached, they finally spotted the abandoned mining camp hidden between snow-covered rocks. Broken cabins leaned sideways in the wind while rusted tools lay buried beneath ice. The place looked frozen in time. Caleb dismounted slowly. "Stay close." Emma stepped carefully through the snow while the twins held tightly onto her hands. Hudson pointed nervously toward the darkness ahead. "Mama, somebody's here." Caleb immediately grabbed his rifle. Tracks. Fresh ones. Victor Hale had arrived first. The group moved cautiously through the abandoned camp until they reached the entrance of the old mine. Large wooden beams framed the opening, barely holding the mountain above. A faded warning sign still hung nearby. "Danger. Unstable shaft." Sheriff Dalton lit an oil lantern. "You sure about this?" Caleb looked at Emma. "You still got the key?" Emma touched the silver chain around her neck. "Yes." "Then we finish this." Inside the mine, darkness swallowed them completely. Cold air echoed through endless tunnels while dripping water bounced off stone walls. The twins stayed close beside Emma. Henry whispered nervously, "I don't like this place." "Neither do I," Emma admitted softly. As they moved deeper underground, Caleb noticed strange markings carved into the walls. Numbers, symbols, directions. Then suddenly, voices. The group froze instantly. Victor Hale's men. Caleb quickly lowered the lantern light. Around the corner, several armed workers stood beside wooden crates filled with mining equipment. And at the center of them all stood Victor Hale himself. "Well," Hale said calmly, "I was wondering when you'd arrive." Emma's heart pounded. Victor smiled coldly. "You've caused me quite a bit of trouble, Mrs. Whitmore." Caleb stepped forward protectively. "End of the line, Hale." Victor chuckled softly. "You really think this is about gold?" He motioned toward the tunnel behind him. "It's much bigger than that." Sheriff Dalton frowned. "What are you hiding?" Victor's smile disappeared. "Progress." Before anyone could react, Hale's men surrounded them with rifles raised. Emma held the twins tightly. Caleb's hand slowly moved toward his revolver. Victor noticed immediately. "I wouldn't." Tension filled the mine. Then Victor turned toward Emma. "Give me the key." "No." Victor sighed impatiently. "You still don't understand what your husband discovered." Emma stared at him with trembling anger. "You murdered him." For the first time, Victor looked genuinely annoyed. "Your husband was a fool. He found something valuable and thought honesty would protect him." Caleb narrowed his eyes. "What did he find?" Victor stepped closer slowly. "Oil." The entire tunnel fell silent. Sheriff Dalton looked shocked. "Oil reserves." Victor nodded proudly. "Enough to make this valley one of the richest places in America." Emma's breathing quickened. "My husband wanted the town to benefit from it. And that," Victor interrupted coldly, "was his mistake." Victor looked toward the dark tunnel behind him. He planned to share ownership with the workers. The ranchers. The families. Victor sneered. "Small-minded dreams." Caleb's expression hardened. "So you killed him." Victor didn't answer directly. Instead, he extended his hand toward Emma again. "The key." Emma slowly backed away. "No." Victor's patience finally snapped. "Take it from her." Two armed men moved forward instantly. But before they could grab Emma, bang! Caleb fired first. Chaos exploded through the tunnel. Gunshots thundered violently inside the mine while workers screamed and scattered. Sheriff Dalton tackled one man into the dirt while Emma pulled the twins behind wooden crates. Caleb fired again. Bang! A lantern shattered nearby. Darkness swallowed half the tunnel instantly. Victor Hale disappeared deeper into the mine. "He's running," Dalton shouted. Caleb chased after him without hesitation. The tunnel twisted sharply underground while collapsing beams groaned overhead. Far ahead, Victor carried another lantern toward a massive steel door built into solid rock. Caleb finally understood. This wasn't just a mine. It was a hidden vault. Victor reached the door and turned furiously toward Caleb. You should have stayed out of this. Caleb raised his revolver. You killed innocent people. Victor laughed bitterly. Innocent. Men die every day chasing wealth. He held up half of the torn map. But only one man gets to own the future. Emma suddenly appeared behind Caleb holding the silver key tightly. Victor's eyes widened. The key opens the vault, Emma realized. Victor smirked. Exactly. He pointed toward the steel door. Inside are the original contracts, land deeds, and oil surveys. Enough wealth to control this entire state. Emma looked horrified. My husband wanted families protected. And I want power, Victor replied coldly. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled violently. Crack. Dust rained from the ceiling. Sheriff Dalton shouted from behind them. The mine's collapsing. Old wooden beams snapped loudly while rocks crashed into the tunnel. Victor panicked instantly and rushed toward Emma. Give me the key. But Emma stepped backward. No. Victor grabbed her arm violently. Then Caleb punched him hard across the face. Victor stumbled sideways near the unstable edge of a mining shaft. The tunnel shook again. Crack. The ground beneath Victor suddenly gave way. His eyes widened in terror as he slipped over the edge. Caleb instinctively grabbed his wrist before he fell completely into the darkness below. Victor dangled above the deep shaft, breathing heavily. For one long moment, everything stopped. Victor looked up fearfully. Please. Emma stared silently. This was the man who destroyed her husband, burned Caleb's ranch, terrified her children. Caleb tightened his grip, then spoke quietly. Mercy's expensive, remember. Victor's face filled with shame. And for the first time in his life, he understood fear. A home worth fighting for. Deep beneath Blackstone Canyon, the mine trembled violently around them. Rocks crashed from the ceiling while dust filled the air. Victor Hale dangled helplessly over the endless shaft, gripping Caleb Turner's arm with desperate strength. Don't let me fall, Victor shouted. Caleb's muscles strained as loose stones crumbled beneath his boots. Emma stood nearby clutching the twins tightly while Sheriff Dalton yelled from the tunnel behind them. The whole mine's coming down. Victor looked into Caleb's eyes with pure terror. For years, Victor Hale had controlled people through fear. Now fear controlled him. Please, he whispered again. Caleb stared at the man who had destroyed so many lives. A part of him wanted to let go. After everything Victor had done, maybe he deserved it. But then Caleb remembered something his late wife once told him years ago. The kind of man you become after pain matters more than the pain itself. Caleb exhaled slowly, then pulled Victor upward with all his strength. Victor collapsed onto solid ground, coughing heavily. Emma looked, shocked. You saved him. Caleb grabbed Victor's coat and dragged him toward the tunnel. Doesn't mean I forgive him. Another violent tremor shook the mine. Crack. The wooden beams supporting the ceiling snapped loudly. We gotta move, Dalton shouted. The group raced through the collapsing tunnel as rocks crashed behind them. Henry cried while Emma carried Hudson through the dust and darkness. Ahead, a narrow section of tunnel suddenly collapsed completely. Emma froze in horror. We're trapped. Caleb looked around quickly, then noticed old dynamite crates near the wall. Sheriff Dalton's eyes widened. You're not thinking. Only way out. Caleb grabbed a stick of dynamite and lit the fuse. Run. Everyone sprinted down the tunnel moments before. Boom. The explosion blasted through the rocks, opening a narrow escape path toward daylight. Cold mountain air rushed inside. They stumbled out of the mine just as the entrance behind them collapsed completely beneath tons of rock and snow. Silence followed. The canyon stood still once again. Emma fell to her knees holding the twins tightly while Caleb breathed heavily beside her. Victor Hale sat nearby covered in dirt and defeat. For the first time in his life, he had nothing. Sheriff Dalton slowly approached him. It's over, Victor. Victor looked toward the destroyed mine. All that wealth never belonged to you, Emma said quietly. Dalton pulled handcuffs from his coat. You're under arrest for murder, arson, fraud, and conspiracy. Victor didn't fight back. He simply lowered his head as the sheriff led him away. Snowflakes drifted softly through the canyon while the first sunrise touched the mountains. And for the first time in many years, Emma finally felt free. 3 months later, spring arrived slowly across Briar Ridge. Snow melted from the plains while green grass returned to the valley. Life began again. Thanks to the documents recovered from the mine, ownership of the oil reserve legally transferred to the town workers and local families exactly as Emma's husband had intended. Briar Ridge changed almost overnight. New homes were built, businesses reopened, families found work again, and far outside town, Caleb Turner's ranch no longer felt lonely. Laughter echoed through the fields almost every day now. "Catch me," Henry shouted as the twins ran through the grass chasing chickens. Caleb leaned against the fence smiling faintly while Emma hung fresh laundry nearby. "You're smiling again," she teased softly. Caleb shrugged. "Don't spread rumors." Emma laughed quietly. It was a sound Caleb had grown to love. Over the past months, something gentle had slowly grown between them. Not forced, not rushed, just real. The kind of love built from survival, trust, and healing. That evening, the four of them sat together outside watching the sunset paint the Montana sky orange and gold. Hudson climbed into Caleb's lap sleepily. "Are you gonna stay with us forever?" he asked. Caleb looked at Emma. Her eyes met his softly. Then Caleb looked back at the little boy. "If your mama allows it." Henry grinned widely. "You'd make a good dad." The words hit Caleb harder than any bullet ever could. For a moment, emotion stole his voice completely. Emma reached for his hand quietly. And this time, Caleb didn't pull away. The cowboy who once believed his life ended with loss finally understood something important. Sometimes God sends broken people into each other's lives, not to reopen old wounds, but to help them heal. As stars slowly appeared above the ranch, Emma rested her head against Caleb's shoulder. And surrounded by the family he never expected to find, Caleb Turner finally felt home again. Please friends spot my channel. Like, share, comment, subscribe for more stories. Thanks for watching.